This is a true story, told to me by a friend about 5 years ago. Here's his paraphrased account. I'm a Marine, and at the same time this occurred, I was 2 days out from ending my tour. Intent told us that a band of insurgents were held up inside a series of caves in Ad-Dwar. We split up and searched 2 deep caverns in groups of 3. Every corner turned came with it an unparalleled feeling of anxiety and dread, thinking that any second one of us would step on an IED and end up blown up to bits or trapped in rubble forever. Once we hit the 200-yard mark, my team lead got a call on his walkie-talkie that a man and woman bearing rifles were apprehended. It turned out that they weren't the insurgents we were after. They were found deep within the cave, with guns and an old cuneiform stone tablet seated around a small fire. They were detained and sent back to base in an armoured vehicle, while I kept the tablets in my possession. Just before leaving the cave, our hearts nearly stopped when a blood-curdling screech emanated from deeper inside. It sounded like some sort of animal, and we didn't want to explore further. The front of the tablet was a transcription that I couldn't figure out. The flip side was a drawing. A snake head with horns, reptilian eyes, and serpent's tongue. Despite it being old and worn, the drawing was actually quite unnerving. I kept it with me as a souvenir. Before the couple were loaded into the truck, the woman looked at me and said, "You'd be wise to leave it behind." The following several nights, I had a barrage of horrific dreams where I brutally murdered my wife and daughter, and upon waking, I'd hear a voice damning me to hell. I brushed it off as stress, though oddly, my sense of smell was unusually strong. I could smell flowers 50 yards away. The dreams persisted after I got home. I showed my wife the tablet, and she kept it as a souvenir. She placed it in a small shelf we had on the wall. Not 2 days after getting back, I'd wake up in the middle of the night from those terrible dreams, only to find out my wife was out of bed. I'd discover her wandering aimlessly through the house, mumbling to herself and all disorientated, like a somnambulance. This went on for 2 weeks, and then one night, it broke loose. When I got out of the shower on this particular night, I walked into the bedroom to see my wife sitting on the edge of the bed, just staring at the tablet on the wall in a trance-like state. I spoke to her repeatedly, but was unable to get her to respond. She was just staring. I looked at her eyes, and sure enough, they were fixated on that tablet. I lightly grasped her chin and turned her head toward me. I shouldn't have done that. She gazed into my eyes with big, dilated pupils, rendering her irises fully black. She was gritting her teeth in a sort of angry, demonic scowl. I've never seen a look of true hatred until that moment. I could feel it penetrating my soul. Then, something magical and evil in equal measure occurred. She started whispering at me, stammering what sounded like gibberish, or more frighteningly, speaking in tongues. In this moment, her voice sounded like a man's, and the room began to fill it with a pungent, repugnant stench which was indescribable, like rotting garbage inside of a dumpster, and the look in my wife's unblinking eyes sent chills down my spine, and had all of my hairs standing at attention. I felt so vulnerable at the moment, and subconsciously knew we'd been invaded by an evil force. She looked like she wanted to harm me. It was palpable. I could think of nothing else but to grab her by the hand, close my eyes, and pray the rosary over and over. Her palms were cold as ice, and clutched so stiff that I'd not even been able to pry them open with a vice grip. As seconds passed, I finally heard Adam, spoken in that sweet, feminine voice I've become accustomed to all these years. "Adam, what just happened?" "Oh, baby, are you okay? Tell me what's wrong. She replied with, "I don't know. I got out of the tub and came in here. And I don't remember anything in between then and you coming in here. Was I talking?" "No, babe, you were just staring." "Adam, please get rid of that tablet." "Why, babe?" I asked. Her response made my blood run cold. "Because ever since you brought it home, I've been getting the feeling that I want to kill you and Lacey. Something evil is in our house." I grabbed it immediately, tossed it outside in the trash. The next day, I threw it in the river. Ever since that day, things have gone back to normal. I don't know what exactly happened to her that night, but she later claimed to have seen shadows moving around the house just after I got home, both day and night. One day, she said she saw a black, shadowy mass hovering in the centre of the living room, and she said I could feel it watching me. And worse, I felt that it hated me. I think something was inside of her that night, and I believe that had I kept that tablet, she might have went through with one of her feelings. It was an odd few moments when my husband John got home from work to tell me that our next door neighbour, Mrs. Swanson, had become pregnant. Judith is a war widow, as in her husband was blown to bits in the invasion of Normandy, and in the ensuing decades she never remarried. Judith is 91 years old. It would be preposterous to think of a near centenarian giving birth from a body which is a natural, decaying artefact, whose fecundity card expired 4 decades ago. "Celebrate the vernal season with the birth of a new legacy," read the invitation, scrolled across the top of an image on a blank head, half in blue outlined with short hair, and the other half in pink, with eyelashes and a ponytail. The date of the events was inscribed on the bottom. Of course, I was a little more than vexed when I showed up, and nobody else was there but myself, Mrs. Swanson, and her granddaughter Isabella. Unfortunately, very few of my grandmother's friends or siblings are still alive, but thank you for coming, and I assume you can already tell her that my parents are estranged. "Oh, it's no problem. I appreciate the invite," I said in an obvious, disquieted tone. "Would you like to see the sonogram?" Sure." "You're late," I repeatedly texted John, obtaining no response. "Where is your grandma?" I asked Isabella, while gazing upon a black and white x-ray of an obviously healthy fetus. "Oh, she's just putting her face on. You know, this is a proud day for her, and she wants to look her best." "I can imagine," I replied, trying to be nonchalant at this ever more bothersome turn of events, but I wouldn't be rude and just leave. "Where's your husband?" asked Isabella with a somewhat excitable disposition. She gleamed a bright smile the entire time. "Oh, well, he's on his way. He left earlier to help his brother fix his car." She breathed faintly. "Well, this is a lovely house." "Well, thank you. It's mostly my doing. Gram doesn't move around so anymore." "I understand." Several awkward moments of silence passed before Isabella hit me with a rather odd and admittedly forward question. "Has your husband been coming home late from work recently?" In fact, he has. But how can she know? Actually, he has. Why? And why do you think the two of you haven't had children yet? I was dumbstruck. My pulse began to thump in my carotid artery, and forehead began to perspire. "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife," or granddaughter would be more fitting. We're very pious, I'm sure you'd agree. Before I could answer, I heard the footsteps creaking slowly down the stairs like some unspoken impending doom, and my heart began to race. "You mean your grandmother?" "Oh, honey," Isabella began, "you're so misguided. This is my gender reveal party. Do you really believe my grandmother could bear children at 91? Anxiety, shortness of breath, nearing nervous breakdown. What are you telling me?" I asked with quivering, rapid-fire speech. I'm telling you that we've taken care of everything. Not only your divorce, but the life insurance settlement's coming your way. Oh, and there she is. Over there, Gram. My hands began to shake as Mrs. Swanson made her final step from behind the wall in her orthopaedic white shoes to the living room floor and turned the corner. I nearly fainted when she turned to look at me, her eyes bulging through the sockets of my husband's carved-off face, smattered over hers with a grey bun protruding out the back. And in a split second, Isabella warmly placed her hand on my sweating, shivering palm and whispered it to me. It's a boy. It was about 2:30 in the morning when I decided to take a walk. Tomorrow's grades would start coming in on my report card, and I needed to relieve some anxiety. I passed by a church when I noticed a man at the intersection waiting at the crosswalk. He was wearing a business suit, rain hat, and holding an open umbrella. But it wasn't raining. I found it odd. I just wanted to be alone, so I put down my head and kept going. My anxiety was getting worse and worse. Next, I passed by a playground, the distant streetlights barely illuminating. I noticed a person crawling across the monkey bars, not hanging from them, but crawling across the top like a centipede. Kids. Before turning away, I saw something that filled me with dread. A closed umbrella resting against the slide. I put my head down and walked faster. My anxiety was skyrocketing. Soon, I approached a row of houses, and I swear I saw someone crawl underneath an SUV, but not come out the other side. As I passed, I noticed the same umbrella propped against the vehicle. My anxiety tripled, and my heart began racing. I turned and began sprinting back to my apartment. After a few hundred yards, it looked like I lost him. I can't fathom how this person was getting ahead of me. As I pulled the keys from my pocket, I noticed one single vehicle parked on the curb. All I could see was the silhouette of a man in a rain hat, staring at me. It was just then, when I pulled open the door, that I felt something fall onto my foot. An umbrella was laying across my toes. I hurried up and slammed the door behind me, locking it, and ran to my room. I felt a panic attack oncoming. My psychiatrist always told me that it's going to get the best of me. Just as I was about to enter my apartment, the girl across the hall opened her door. Hey, can you help me? My smoke detector was going off and I don't know how to fix it. What a stress reliever this was. I've always liked this girl. Yeah, no problem. I smiled, acting as nonchalant as possible. I shut my door and went in. Finally, a little relief. She was trying to go to bed. I'd have loved to have stayed, but I'm not that forward. So we exchanged numbers, and I went back into my apartment, gleaming at a number in my phone. Adriana. I flicked on the light, and it hit me. I left my door unlocked the entire time. The anxiousness returned, worse than ever. Not sure if I can control it much longer. In the split-second moment I saw the umbrella leaning against the couch, a grumbling baritone voice breathed in my ear. It's not your fault. I was always a step ahead of you. The lights flicked off behind me, and I felt the blade go into my back. I don't know whether to pull it out or let myself go. Maybe I'm better off this way. I always said I was delusional. Beware, Ngatoriangi, the tour guide said upon hearing where we wanted to camp. Beware who? Don't ask how to pronounce it, because it's been 8 years and I still can't do it. It's just local legend. It's a demon. He comes at night near the cliffs. He smiled cheekily and gave us a compass. My wife and I went on vacation to New Zealand, camping for a night at the gorgeous, picturesque Lake Taupo. Lake Taupo is actually in the caldera of a volcano, subsequently leading to speculation about supernatural phenomena in local legend, and claims that it's one of Earth's gateways to hell. Because we went in July, their winter, most of the beach was barren. Also, we chose to camp on the northwestern side, which was rife with 90-degree cliffs, and carved into those cliffs are giant faces made by natives centuries ago. The intended purpose is to keep the caldera from eruption. Superstition. And if you're going to take a 24-hour flight, might as well go all out. There's something foreboding about giant grimacing faces looking into your soul, carved 20 feet tall in granite. It wasn't until nightfall that the resting landscape erupted, not magma, but dreadful screeching deep into the brush behind us. We'd fallen asleep so peacefully until it began. Simultaneously we awoke. You could have heard it for miles. An owl? She asked. That's not all I've ever heard. It wasn't coming from one spot. It was emanating all around us, including in the waters ahead. It's a hawk. It's hovering over us right now. It was the rational explanation, until it got louder. It was obviously ground level. I think we shouldn't have camped here, she said shakily, and this is when the branches behind us began crackling, and whispering voices approached. I flashed my light on them. Teenagers. 2 boys and a girl. What the fuck are you all doing here? I raged. We're sorry, one of the boys spoke. We were going to play a prank until we heard it. Their thick Aussie dialect proves them to be locals. Consequently, just by looking at their expressions, they were as disquieted as we were, bordering on pure fright. It chased us here. Something in the woods. The girl cut in with, we were running the path and it came up out of the dirt. Whatever it is, began the first boy. It's just beyond that. Before he could finish, that horrific, high-pitched shriek sounded out just yards away, both behind and in front. And this is when we noticed a mist rising from the water. As we gazed upon the water, something deep black slowly broke the surface. In this moment, the horrifying screecher zeroed in on the murky water figure. The teens collectively screamed and bolted through the forest. I suppose we should have too. And despite my wife tugging at my arm, I couldn't move. Instead, I pulled my hunting knife and just waited for the creature to step onto land. However, our shock and terror diminished when I shone my light on it. It wasn't a monster, just a man in scuba attire. Oi, he shouted. You folks camping? We thought you were something else. This time of year we have to check mercury toxicity in the water. Less people in the winter, so we track it at night. Didn't mean to frighten you. We heard something in the woods. I swear, before shining my light on him, I witnessed a mass of long black tentacles protruding from his head and torso. Also, the pungent stench of rotten eggs wafted in the air. As the man continued to approach, stepping in long strides because of his flippers, something just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right that the noises ceased. It didn't feel good that the screeches seemed to have come from him. And it was just out of place that a scuba diver would simply appear from the lake at 1:30 a.m. Should we not be camping here then? My wife questions. Especially since the water is toxic? No, you're fine. It's me who interrupted you. And not to worry, the water's fine. Suddenly his voice changed before our ears as he moved in closer. Do you know about the demon? We just looked at each other with worried glances. Yeah, the tour guide told us about something. And finally, the scuba diver said something so terrifying that we just ran to our car and left our things. In a deep, baritone grumble, he opened up his mask, displaying a completely absent face, as literally nothing but the back of the inside of his helmet was all we could see. And finally he said in a dreadful tone, You don't even know what this is, do you? We sprinted until our legs were on fire, got in the car and peeled out, all the way to the hotel about 15 miles away. We didn't sleep much that night. The next day, we went back to the tourist office and met the same man as the day before. I told him about the scuba diver, but left out anything about the demon. He regarded us with a look of confusion and a forward bow. He mentioned how odd it was. We don't have divers in this lake because of the high levels of sulfur at the bottom of the caldera. The pressure's too high, so that makes no sense, he said as he scratched his chin. You sure it wasn't a prank? We're sure, my wife interrupted. There were some kids, but they said they just wanted to play a prank on us. Something chasing through the woods. I suppose the sulfur explains the rotten eggs, but shouldn't it have smelled like that the entire time? The tour guide said one last thing. It still chills me to the bone. Natororiangi. Well, this sounds superstitious, but... But? Well, the locals have been saying it for centuries. It can come as anything at once. If you heard shrieking, then you were probably on its radar. We went and got our things, which were untouched, left, never went back. That man is a bullshitter, my wife said on the drive to the airport. I just nodded my head in affirmation. However, I didn't agree. I never told the tour guide about shrieking, nor could I explain the black sludge all over our tent. I've been staying at my mum's, taking care of her while she has COVID. My Aunt Linda lives in the basement as well, and has been for 10 years. She's very ill, living with severe COPD, constantly having trouble breathing. She also lost a leg due to a septic infection, and is wheelchair bound. Also, because of her immobility, she's morbidly obese. I went downstairs to check on her, and she simply asked for a cup of ice, a very typical request, as she dozed off with her oxygen mask on. I got a bath, and when I got out, all the lights in the house were out as per usual, but I saw someone open my door and walk into my room in the dark from the end of the hall. It startled me, and I nearly fell back. Mom. I crept into my room and aimed my phone light. My aunt was sitting on my bed. I was in shock. Not only that, but the room was freezing. I can't explain why, but an imperceptible feeling of dread had my veins pumping ice. She was naked, and when I shone the light on her, she looked up at me and said, "Honey, I'll have my legs." I dashed out of the room, ready to scream, and ran down into the basement. My aunt was lying, facing the door, lips blue, and tongue hanging out of her mouth, looking at me. I shuddered at the image. I checked her pulse, and she didn't have one. My nieces went missing 4 days ago. My sister, Shauna, is a pasture animal on her way home to the slaughter. She's currently being treated in McKeesport Hospital ICU after my brother-in-law found her soaking in a hot bath with opened wrists. He's a wreck too, and now he's got to deal with a suicidal wife. To be honest, I only believe she'll continue to make attempts until they turn up. Last night, Shauna called me frantic, repeating to me the phrase, "The pipes are rattling through the walls and my head is a buzzsaw." Her husband found her almost dead, but not an hour later. My nieces, Chelsea and Christina, both 13-year-old twins, were last seen on their way home from school, walking into the woods to take the trail home. Our tight-knit community, God bless them, have been trading shifts with search parties, but the reality of it is looking more and more grim, and the groups have practically dwindled to nothing. Consequently, the incessant whirring of helicopters in the sky the first 2 nights were a constant reminder of the horror of the situation. But it was they who made a hopeful discovery. 2 girls were found in the middle of the second night walking through the woods hand in hand at 2:15 in the morning. My wife and I immediately sped to my sister's after getting the call. The two girls looked eerily similar to my nieces, except their noses were bigger, and they told police that their names are Agatha. Both of them. Actually, let me rephrase that. One of them said their names were Agatha and Agatha. The other was found with her mouth sewn shut with twine, and dried, pasty blood cascading down her chin and neck. "Don't touch her," repeated the uninjured girl, as she thrashed and wailed about while they took her sister to the hospital. "You can't let her talk. She'll let it out," the girl demanded as she screamed and kicked. We went with my brother to the station to identify the girls. "Are these your daughters?" the detective asked. I don't... No, they're not. I don't think. My girls were wearing white dresses, and they had coats on. After all, it was late November and quite cold. And my girls don't have hair that dark. I'm sorry, detective, but I'm confused. Furthermore, my nieces are quite talkative, and it would make no sense that one of them would have gotten a fucking mouth sewn shut and been not just cavalier about it, but joyful, according to the police. They explained that when they approached the girls, they were twirling around and giggling. Even strangers at the first responding officers both expressed intense feelings of uneasiness coming up on them. It's been 2 days that the girls were taken into custody. Doctors have successfully removed the wire from the second girl's mouth, and she's been asleep ever since. I went to visit my sister in the psych ward today. She was mostly despondent and heavily sedated. "They found them?" she slurred, half nodding off. "Are you asking me or telling me?" I questioned. "You should go and talk to them. The girls." As she ran her fingers up and down the stitches on her wrists, she repeated to me the same thing from the other night. The pipes are rattling, and my head is a buzzsaw. As far as those girls are concerned, I received a call this afternoon from my brother-in-law, asking me to please come over to his house. It sounded urgent, but he refused to talk on the phone. I wasn't prepared. When I showed up, he texted me, "Just come in." There was a vehicle in the driveway I didn't recognise. When I entered the home, I nearly fell backwards. My brother-in-law, sister, and both of my nieces were seated on the couch. Christina had stitches running along her upper and lower lips, and her sister was holding her. Both were crying. Suddenly, a short African-American woman entered the room from the kitchen, along with a police officer. "Okay, Christina, he's here. What did you want to tell us?" She responded with something horrifying, and I've no idea what world I'm even living in. She murmured painfully through her mutilated face, "I just wanted to see Uncle Greg's eyes when I told you that he caught us both on the way home from school, took us into the old cabin in the woods, and sewed my mouth shut. And then," Chelsea remarked, "he tied me up and made me watch, and then left." I couldn't stop shivering. Nerves shredded, heart rate rising. This can't be happening. "Greg Reed, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. I told you she'd let it out. I told you." Diary entry, 28th of November, 2020. I visited my brother Greg in jail today. He's facing up to 40 years for child abuse, endangerment, and attempted murder. I should have thought something might manifest one day, but after 27 years, he seems to have been handling it well. I guess he broke, and he deserves what he's getting, but I can't help but feel sorrow over it as well. A long time ago, Greg was abducted when we were kids on his way home from school by a psychopath in our town named Agatha. She did things to him, and he secretively told me that she threatened him with the words, "If you say anything to anyone, I'll come and find you, sew your mouth shut, and leave you in a cabin to rot." He said when she was abusing him, he could do nothing but focus on the rattling pipes in a moment of dissociation. For years, he would draw pictures of the old woman and violently stab it with pencils, threatening that he'd find her and do the same thing with her she did to him. Well,
He did find her, in his own delusional fantasy. In the end, I exploded on him, telling him I hope he rots for what he did to my girls. Before we parted ways, I asked him one question. Why did he leave Chelsea unharmed? Ultimately, she's the one who got out of her bonds, and the reason they escaped. Please tell me you just felt bad. His reply made my blood run cold. He said, I was going back home to get a buzzsaw.